Hello. We're here for content today. Last week we looked a little bit at how I might approach revision for the questions in the Cold War section, consequence, narrative account and importance. Hopefully that was helpful. You might have tried it out and it wasn't helpful. That's good in and of itself. It doesn't work for me. You're on one step closer to getting to the thing which will work for you. However, today we're just going to focus on content. We've got 50 years, we've got 40 minutes. It's going to be quite a lot, and hopefully this will just remind ourselves of that story and trigger some memories and remind, oh, it was that order, or that caused that. So it's not going to be how we're going to put this into questions. I'm just literally going to take us through 50 years of Cold War history. Mostly in this geographical area, but of course we are out there in Cuba and a few other places as well, Afghanistan there. So I'm going to take us through in kind of 6 stages, 6 different elements of the Cold War and the story internally within that 5 to 10 year period. So let's just go back right to the beginning, right to the start. Course starts 41. Some of you were a bit annoyed about that when it came to the mock. The Grand Alliance, narrative account, 41 through to 45, we do need to know what that Grand Alliance is. Grand Alliance is our big 3, Britain, I put it top of the list, USA, USSR and Britain, headed by FDR, USA, Churchill, Britain, and of course Stalin in the USSR. They don't like each other, or at least 2 don't like the other. However, there's someone they dislike even more, and that is Nazi Germany. Nazi Germany is an existential threat to Britain. Nazi Germany is an existential threat to the Soviet Union. And by being allied to Japan, it has directly attacked, or rather, its ally has directly attacked America. So they're all united by that anti-Nazi desire. This is leading us into our conferences. Tehran 43, broadly, we agree. Why? Because Nazism still is a threat. The tide has turned. The war has probably become inevitable in its conclusion by that point, the outcome of it, but we still need each other's help. So broadly at Tehran, we do see agreements, the 1 or 2 disagreements, things like Churchill wanting to invade through the Balkans down here. He's already seeing that, ooh, if they sweep through Eastern Europe, we're in trouble. Maybe an invasion here would lead to a bulwark to stop that happening. So we do have some disagreements around Tehran, but broadly it's fine. FDR, American president, recognizes he still needs Roosevelt, needs Stalin, and therefore FDR stays close with Stalin. Yalta, things are fraying. We're into 45. Things are fraying because Germany's glue is lessening. Germany is definitely going to lose by February 45, so we need each other less. Broad agreement still, Germany into 4, United Nations, etc., but more conflicts, more arguments are coming through, and there is less resistance than there was towards Stalin. Why? FDR's very, very old. He's only got a few months left to live. His energy to resist aggressive Stalin pushing is limited. And finally, we are into Potsdam of 45, when essentially the Grand Alliance breaks down. We do get agreements on post-war Europe, a United Nations, and again, this administrative split up of Germany. But the future is now clear. Germany is defeated. We still need to defeat Japan, but the future is determined in Europe because no Germany exists. Why would the USA, a capitalist democracy, be allied with a one-party communist state without this Nazi glue there anymore? They wouldn't. They wouldn't. And this fracture clearly develops at Potsdam. Other factors which are exacerbating it are, of course, Truman's arrival. Truman is not the politician that FDR is. He's not the diplomat that FDR is. And therefore, when he doesn't like someone, he's far less good at hiding that. He's clearly hostile to Stalin. and therefore we have a fracture of personalities. You've also got British leadership changing in the middle of the conference. Attlee replaces Churchill. And no matter what you think of Attlee and where you place him in 20th century British prime ministers, what he does for welfare state, NHS, etc., there's no doubt that a Stalin, having dealt with Churchill, and again, no matter what you think of Churchill, he is an imposing international figure. He is intimidating as a politician. Attlee, I don't know if we showed you the picture of Attlee. He's a nice man with a bald head and a mustache, and he's quite like cramped like this. And Stalin's going, yep, I'll eat that guy alive. So Stalin's feeling far more emboldened. We've got the American development of the bomb and the Soviets not being shared this information. So Stalin's feeling, are we allies or are we not? I know we're not really allies, but you should be telling us about these things. USA now has a far bigger weapon to force its hand at Potsdam as well. It can say, I want this at Potsdam. Oh, do you? Yeah, I do, mate. Because we just exploded a massive bomb in the middle of New Mexico. And if you muck around with us, we have that. So there's that threat element coming into it. But on the flip side, what the Soviet strength and weight and power is its numbers. The Red Army is huge, and there is no real Soviet demobilization. When the British Army and the American armies have defeated Germany, that process of demobilization and sending, obviously we're going to retain a force to denazify, etc. But the majority of people, that process begins. For the Soviets, the army stays. Why is the army staying? Why is the army staying? What are they up to? What are they going to do with the army? Are they going to keep going? If they're not going to keep going, why have they not sent people home? So there's that element coming in. And we really do get the break, the fracture of that Grand Alliance. At that point, finally, Poland has been occupied, and we can already see what's going to happen in Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Romania, Bulgaria, Albania, those satellite states. That process already has begun. You go back to the British in particular, why did they go to war with Nazi Germany in the first place? It was about the Nazi invasion of Poland. That was the trigger for Britain declaring war on Nazi Germany. And now we see a Soviet-controlled, Soviet-rigged elections going on. Why did we go to war in the first place? We're just replacing one group with another who is limiting Polish freedom. So that is playing a part in British kind of antagonism and break with the Soviets. So that's all happening through those conferences. Potentially understandably, but with the addition of Truman's kind of hostility towards Stalin, with Truman having the bomb and America having the bomb, because the Soviets have lost 25 to 28 million people in the Second World War from a westward invasion, an eastward invasion from the west, going that way. I'm not making excuses for Stalin, I'm not an apologist, but I can see the mindset where he goes, I'm just going to take control of those places. I am going to build a wall. I'm going to build a wall. I'm going to build a wall here. If it means Soviet democracy has to be surrendered, Czech liberalism has to be sacrificed for that, I do not give a toss. They wiped us out. From the west into the east, they wiped us out. It's never happening again. And therefore, Poland, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, Romania, Bulgaria, Albania, those governments are established as Soviet-friendly. Puppets, satellite states within that gravitational pull of Moscow. And it's this which is leading to the American response. What we are always seeing is when one side does one thing, the other responds. And it's that Soviet expansion to this point which is leading to that next big stage, which is our American response. They've come this far. Why would they stop? It's in communist doctrine. It's an internationalist ideology. World revolution is what they believe. So why would they stop? Why would they just draw the line there and stop? It says it in their books, world revolution. They have the manpower. The Red Army has not demobilized. They're going to keep going. So America has to respond, and it responds with containment. Spark being Greece. All these countries have had these puppets set up in them. And in Greece, we see a similar process happening. Civil war has broken out. A communist side, backed by the Soviet Union, is in conflict with the royalists, who are backed by the West. If we let that go, what that means is the next domino is going to fall. It'll fall into Italy, it'll fall into France, it'll fall into Spain, it'll fall into Portugal. Europe will be done. It'll fall into Turkey and then into the Middle East. We can't allow that to happen. So containment has to be enacted, and it has to be enacted now. We've got those warnings coming in as well. We've got Kennan in Moscow telling me in his long telegram, do something now. These guys are bad and they're going to keep going. We've got Churchill, Iron Curtain, saying, I've seen on that side of the wall and we don't want to get it any further. That side of the curtain, keep it there. So what we get in 47 is the two prongs to our containment umbrella. Truman Doctrine, America is committed politically and militarily to Western Europe. Economic element to back this up will give a load of money as well. Why? So people like Greece can arm themselves. Why? Because if people have money in their pockets, the extremes seem far less attractive. I've got money in my pockets, I've got food in my belly, my child has food in his belly. Why do we need to go to that side or that side? Why would I join a communist insurgency, for example? So it's that two-pronged approach. We give him political support, military support, but also by making people wealthy, we make them happy. They stay in the centre. They don't move to one of these extremes. With that then, Europe is divided politically and economically into these two power bases. The Western Bloc and our Eastern Bloc. And that's kind of where those colours are now drawn in with felt tip pens. We're not just shading anymore, we can colour them in with felt tip pens. These guys are definitely on this side, those guys are definitely on that side. What we see here is a response. We always get that response. The Truman Doctrine is kind of shadowed, mirrored by something called Common Form, and the Marshall Plan is mirrored and shadowed by something called Comecon, which is tying Eastern European governments and Eastern European economies of these states far closer to Moscow. So the stage is set for our conflict. Happy with that? Cool. Excellent. So we break out into open antagonism, open opposition to each other. And it really comes into public consciousness, first of all, through Berlin. Why Berlin? Because it is deep, deep, deep behind, in Western minds, enemy lines. You look at the geography, plays such an important part in the Cold War. Sorry, it's really small, but Berlin is where my finger is. It's close to the Polish border, it's deep within East Germany, or what was the Soviet zone in Germany at that point. Stalin, obviously worried. I've had a huge invasion from the West 6 years ago, never happening again. Yet, we have an entity deep within our own territory, which could be a launch pad for invasion, a launch pad for spies, a launch pad for missiles. We have to get them out of there. Also, is acting as a shop window. If I'm Marshall, if I'm Truman, if I'm a capitalist, liberal Democrat on the West, I'm saying, give a crap load of money into Berlin. Because West Berlin will start to look awesome. Cars, Coca-Cola, chewing gum, big shops, etc., etc. Stalin doesn't want that because his population's under communism. Oh, That looks nice, doesn't it? Doesn't that look nice? I like Coca-Cola. I like fizzy drinks. I'm going to go there. So I want to push them out for that reason. There we get our first real confrontation, which is our blockade. Stalin surrounding West Berlin, cutting off all of those rail, road and canal links into West Berlin, which the Allies have been utilising to support and supply and feed West Berlin. However, the West have committed to containment, or rather the Americans are committed to containment. They can't allow this to happen. If they allow communism to spread into West Berlin, they've not contained it. We need to contain it at the borders of where it currently is. And if it goes into there, we've failed. If we fail here, do we then fail in Italy? Do we then fail in France? Do we fail in West Germany, in Denmark? We cannot allow failure to happen. So we get the huge response of the airlift. We can't get into railroad or canal, fine, we go over the top. We throw it in from West Germany. Catch, guys, and fly thousands and thousands and thousands of tons of supplies in food, fuel, bricks, everything to rebuild is coming in through this airlift, flying from here into Berlin. And the Soviets are not shooting these planes down, probably because I shoot one of those down, what do the Americans have, which I don't have? Shooting down one of those planes is an act of war, and if we go to war with those guys, at this moment in time, 48, I do not have the bomb. They do have the bomb. Those planes can get in. They're not shooting them down. Best part of a year, I think we're July to June, or July to May, or June to May. So 10, 11 months, thousands and thousands. Get your evidence from the textbook. 90 seconds, it's high. Every 90 seconds, another plane lands. Every 90 seconds, another plane lands. Every 90 seconds, another plane lands. Stalin has to give it up in the summer of, or the spring of 49. But what it means is we move to the next stage. Germany officially divided. FRG, the Federal Republic of Germany, GDR, German Democratic Republic, West and East. More significantly, potentially, formation of something we've been hearing a lot about over the last few weeks, a military alliance in the West, NATO, North Atlantic Treaty Organization, which ties militarily all of the West together. It now can't prey on Italy. It now can't prey on Iceland, with its very small population. It now can't prey on one of these and take them out, because it says, if he attacks one of us, we all come together, including the USA. They will come to Iceland's aid. That would be like an attack on them. So formation of NATO in 49. Not a direct result is the Warsaw Pact. It takes a little leap. It's another 6 years. It's actually the allowing of West Germany into NATO, which leads to the formation of the Warsaw Pact. That occurs in May of 55, and that's what leads to the Warsaw Pact forming. Again, those Stalin and Soviet fears of Germany. Where have previous invasions come from? Germany, Berlin, and now they are in NATO. Oh, no, we need to respond with Warsaw Pact. That forms in 1955. So, moving into the 50s, I'm going on very fast here. Huge event in 53 for the 50s. Stalin dies with, is it a stroke? I think it's a huge stroke. Passes away in 53, replaced eventually by Khrushchev. He's not the man who immediately steps in. There's a kind of cabal of leaders and power struggles and tussles, etc. But Khrushchev is our man eventually. Certainly by 56. And in 56, he outlines who he is and what his Soviet Union and bloc will look like. Secret speech, February of 56. Two huge things he talks about in there, which are going to lead to the next phase. De-Stalinization. He was a bad guy. He locked up too many people. He did stuff which was against the principles of the Communist Party and peaceful coexistence. We can live alongside other forms of government peacefully. We won't be aggressive towards them. So it looks like a shift. It looks like a change in Soviet leadership. And this is how it's picked up in Eastern Europe. Because what happens next, in our story anyway, is people responding to that. Hungary, they've got a guy in charge who is pretty Stalinist. Rákosi, he's called. Quite intimidating, nice shiny head, locks up a lot of people, represses the church, secret police, censorship, pretty Stalinist. Also, he's rubbish on the economy. 5-year plan, failing. So I'm poor in Hungary, and I don't like the guy in charge. He's locked up my brother, he's locked up my priest. I would like change. So this lands pretty well in Hungary. Oh, Khrushchev's talking about de-Stalinization. He must be against Rákosi then. Brilliant. We can get rid of Rákosi. So we've got Khrushchev kind of, in my interpretation, as a Hungarian who wants reform, signalling that it's fine. I've also got a new guy in the White House, Eisenhower, who talks about evolving containment into something called rollback. Rolling back the borders of communism. Oh, cool. Because if they roll back the borders of communism, we are on that border, so that might look like rolling back through here. So I've been given hope by Moscow, Khrushchev saying de-Stalinization, and I've been given hope by Washington, who is talking about rollback. Also, if this guy's talking about rollback, who he was is quite important. He was a general. He was in charge of all Allied forces in Europe. He knows how to run an army. Truman used to sell hats in Missouri. Oh, this guy can do what we want him to do. So therefore, Hungary gets that uprising. It gets that howl against Rákosi on the streets. Get rid of Rákosi, pull down that Stalin statue. October 1956, we topple it. Because we think we'll get what we want. They issue a series of demands, and there's one demand which they've gone a bit too far on. Their demands look a lot like Polish demands from the previous month. Poles have done something similar. They said, we want reforms, more autonomy, more independence, more Poles, and they got it. Khrushchev said, yes, you can have it. They essentially give the same demands, but they say one other thing. Plus, we want to leave the Warsaw Pact. Red line. You can't say that. We're in the Cold War. We are two blocks, power blocks, military blocks against each other. If this changes colour, if this leaves the Warsaw Pact, my paranoid Cold War mindset tells me it's going to change to neutral, and then definitely it's going to change to NATO. Look at its position. I can attack north, I can attack south, I can attack straight into the Soviet Union. This cannot happen. And therefore, 4th of November 56, Khrushchev sends the tanks in. We have 20,000 rebels killed. We have 200,000 refugees flee from Hungary, and clamp down. You're not leaving the Warsaw Pact, lads. It's not happening. You're with us. We get a guy called Kadar put in charge in Hungary. Important for holding and kind of maintaining that balance. Also quite important for kind of saying what America will do. America's not going to muck around. They might say roll back, but when push comes to shove, they're not going to roll back. Khrushchev might say de-Stalinization and peaceful coexistence, but when it comes to it, he's got a bigger priority. Security, stability, spheres of influence. And it kind of reinforces that spheres of influence idea. We won't muck around in there. Just make sure you don't muck around here. Cool. So, into next stage. Oof, we're flying here, miss. We're flying, guys. Come on. Capturing this one, Eye of the Storm. This is the real heat of the Cold Wars. We head into the late 50s, into the early 60s. Probably the two most dangerous moments that we study. Checkpoint Charlie at Berlin, tanks facing off against each other, and Cuba, missiles on Cuba, Castro happy to press buttons, Americans invading Soviet allies, etc., etc. So heading into the wall, or rather the Berlin crisis, which results in the wall of 61, for the Soviets, it's all about this flood of people. West Berlin, I can just get into it. If I go to Germany, East Germany, I can just walk into West Berlin. There is no barrier, no divide in West Berlin. So as a German, day trip, as an East German, day trip, drive to Berlin, go into the East, walk across, plane out. And over the course of the 15 years since the end of the war, 4 million people up to 61 have done that. And it's not just numbers, it is who those people are and what they mean for our future ability to compete in a Cold War, compete economically, militarily. It's you lot, the intelligent, educated future who are doing that, who think it's far better life, I'll be able to do far better over there in the West than I will here. It's the people that will drive an economy, the people that will come up with a new missile system, the engineers, etc., which is going to make our society profitable. Those are the guys that go. That's what is known as the brain drain. So it's not just the numbers, it's the nature of those people leaving. East Germany can't afford this, the East can't afford this, so something has to be done. Khrushchev is going to stop it. Berlin Ultimatum of 58. West, get out or we will force you out. The West go, no. We're going to call you bluff. We're not going to remove ourselves from there. Khrushchev's not going to force them out. Still doesn't risk war over that. They try and negotiate their way out of it. We have meetings at Paris and Vienna. They fail for a number of reasons. A U-2 spy plane is shot down during Paris, which means that they all fall apart. And at Vienna, Khrushchev's trying to push Kennedy around. He's new to the presidency. Kennedy has to look strong. He's a pretty little president. To domestic audiences, he can't look weak. He can't look like he's giving in to Khrushchev. So he has to, I will not back down to Premier Khrushchev. So he has to look strong to his domestic audience. Therefore, nothing really gets done. Therefore, leaving us with one solution, or the Easterners, the East with one solution. I've got no other way of doing it. Wall. So summer of 61, that wall is imposed around West Berlin. What it means is the refugee crisis does end. We do get some very immediate kind of moments, flashpoints developing most prominently at Checkpoint Charlie, 27th, 28th of October. A guy wants to go to the theatre. You're not going to the theatre. I'm going to the theatre. He wants to get into East Berlin. So I'm going to call the army up to get me to the theatre. You're not going to the theatre. And we get this build-up of armed vehicles and tanks at that point. This far away from each other. If you fire on me, I'm going to fire on you. Everyone fires on each other. We're away. War. We're done. So we get that moment. It does de-escalate. And we get Kennedy going for his Berliner speech as well in 63. Really using that as a propaganda tool. People on the East are listening to it. It's being broadcast on big loudspeakers over into the East as well. Wicked, I think I'm falling behind a little bit on my pace here, miss, but we're getting through most of it. So we have that as a kind of moment of tension, but it deals with stuff. The wall deals with both of their problems. It deals with the Eastern problem, refugee crisis, solved it. Deals with the West's problem. They keep annoying us about Berlin. He's giving his ultimatums. We have all these meetings which fail. It's sorted now. Good, you built the wall. I can say it's bad, but good, you built the wall. We don't have to worry about Berlin again until it actually comes down in 89. So on to Cuba. Kind of happening simultaneously, overlapping with Berlin. We have the revolution of 59. That is Batista a bad guy, a brutal guy, but an American-friendly guy replaced by Castro. Not yet a communist, not yet a socialist. He's led a popular movement of discontent against the unpleasant leader in Batista. Immediately gets into dispute with the Americans. He needs money. The Americans own everything on Cuba. His means to get money is nationalization of land, nationalization of companies. These are inevitably owned by Americans, and therefore there is an American response. And we get this kind of cycle of nationalization to get money, then embargoes, trade embargoes on sugar and those kind of things, which means he doesn't have money, which means he needs more money, which means he nationalizes more stuff, which gets more embargoes, more trade blocks on him. We get into this cycle. And it's pushing America and Cuba apart to such an extent that the Americans develop the plan that we want to get rid of Castro. An operation led by the CIA called Operation Mongoose begins, and as kind of an offshoot of that, a plan to invade Cuba with Cuban exiles who fled and gone to Florida, send them back, let them start a rebellion in Cuba to overthrow Castro. We'll organize that and send them off. That's the Bay of Pigs incident of 61. La Brigada 2506, 2506, fails miserably. It is a shambles, absolute shambles. But what it does, it confirms in Castro's mind that I have to protect myself, that the Americans definitely want me dead and out. So how do I protect myself? I know. I will cozy up to the Soviets, and I will allow their request to put missiles onto Cuba. This is, in the Soviets' mind, what they're doing is rebalancing the mad world, the arms race world. You go back to that map, you look at our hemispheres, American missiles here, American missiles here, American missiles here, on a border with the Soviet Union, and all the Soviets are doing is, mate, look at the map, you've got them all there, we've got nothing there, we're just being fair. And putting them into Cuba is just making it fair. The Americans obviously don't see it that way. They see it as a direct threat to US security, US homeland, and potential first strikeability of the Soviets, that they might start a nuclear war because of this. So it's those missiles, when they're spotted, which start the Cuban Missile Crisis of '62. America imposes that quarantine around. We have ships on the water pointing guns at each other. There's even a moment where in a submarine, a Soviet submarine, they think they're supposed to fire a nuclear missile. There's 3 of them that have to agree to it. 2 of them agree to fire the nuclear missile. The third goes, lads, I don't think we should. I think it's a mistake. Don't do it. And he vetoes the firing of the nuclear missile. So we get very, very close. So we get the quarantine, and then we get this strange situation of numerous messages coming into the Americans, kind of differing on what they're saying. A hard letter from Khrushchev, do this or we will do this. Lots of demands, do this. And then a far softer one, just get the missiles out of Turkey and we'll get the missiles out of, he says, just don't invade and we'll get the missiles out of Cuba. And eventually they de-escalate this situation. Ultimately agreeing to publicly not invade, but privately they do say we will get the missiles out of Turkey. Khrushchev doesn't get the credit for that and therefore falls a year further on in '64. You could, however, argue that it is the start of détente. The genesis of détente is in there. We realise how close we've come. We realise how dangerous we are. And therefore, come on, lads, let's just sort this out a little bit. Should we get some better communication in here? Yeah, should we get some phones in rather than mad telegrams, which we don't know who it's from? Yeah, let's just get a phone in. So hotline, and then the start of, let's sit down and talk about this. Non-proliferation, don't share nuclear secrets. Outer space, don't test in space. Test ban, don't test above this size of bomb. Nothing big, nothing restrictive, nothing making anything safer, but at least they're talking to each other. At least they're talking to each other. And then last event of the 60s, which I want to touch on, Czechoslovakia of 68, Prague Spring, lots of overlap with Hungary, but it's not exactly the same. Be sure when you're revising that Dubček's not arriving in Hungary and Náři's not arriving in Czechoslovakia, etc. But similar things. I have Novotny in charge in Czechoslovakia. He's got a crap economic system. It's called a new economic model. It's failing. He's got a secret police. He's locking people up. He's locked my brother up. He's locked my husband up, etc., etc. I want change. This change comes through the medium of a guy called Dubček, Alexander Dubček, a communist. He is a communist. He wants communism to thrive and succeed. He just thinks the current version of communism is outdated. He wants to update it to be more human communism, socialism with a human face. So he implements a series of reforms in the shape of the Prague Spring, embedding this philosophy, socialism with a human face. And because of our mindsets, our paranoias of the Cold War, any deviation from what we believe in Moscow must be very problematic, must be dangerous, must ultimately result in an enemy state. So we get fears building up in Brezhnev's mind. He's in charge in the Soviet Union now. We have to stop this happening. If this happens, it will happen everywhere. And therefore, in the summer, we get the invasion of Czechoslovakia by Warsaw Pact powers, not just Soviet Union, Warsaw Pact powers. Everyone is involved in that. They don't want it to spread to their country. Homolka in Poland, Ulbricht in East Germany. They don't want to see that spread to their country. That invasion reverses the reforms and very significantly leads to the implementation and justification for that in the shape of the Brezhnev Doctrine. Any country who deviates from our view of what communism is or threatens the Warsaw Pact in any way, we're totally justifiable in invading them and reimposing our vision for what communism is. And that's a kind of, we don't really from 68 onwards get that big move away, attempts to move away from the Soviet control until Gorbachev's post-85. Why? Because those tanks are going to come in like Prague, like Czechoslovakia in 68. Okay, so that rounds up the 60s, that really kind of intense period of conflict in the Cold War, where we get into essentially its height and where tensions are at their highest. That being said, we've seen with the post-Cuba situation and an attempt at appeasement, de-escalation, that things are going in a slightly better direction. This can probably be seen in Czechoslovakia as well. America don't really care. They've got other things going on. They're in Vietnam. They are in other parts of the world. They have other problems. And Czechoslovakia to them is not that significant. They don't involve themselves. They don't make too big a fuss. Obviously, they have to do their signposting that they're unhappy at the UN and these kind of things, but it's not affecting the trajectory towards the 1970s, which is potentially the end of the Cold War. I've highlighted this slide as being the storm is over. Are we heading there? This period is generally known as détente, warm relations, better relations, and we don't really get a huge crises through the 70s. That trajectory from the mid-60s, post-Cuba realization, heads into the 70s, and we get these series of agreements, treaties, which appear to be setting us on friendlier terms and appear to be setting us to end our differences. These are Strategic Arms Limitation Talks 1, SALT 1, 1972. Nixon, the American president, is going to Moscow a few times. So it's just the sitting down, the talking to, the shaking hands, the having a croissant, the having a coffee. We are in the same room, we are agreeing, we are seeing each other not as demons or communist bogeymen, human beings. So that process in and of itself is improving things. We get to huge kind of cooperation projects, something known as the High Handshake, the Apollo-Soyuz mission, which, if you think about it, is ridiculously complex. A Soviet satellite meeting up with an American satellite in space, the cosmonauts and the astronauts of these two ships meeting and shaking hands in space. The complexity of that is ridiculous, and the cooperation must have been huge. So that's kind of highlighting that these people can work together. We head into the Helsinki Accords, a series of kind of really important agreements around security in Europe. They agree on borders. We respect each other's borders, and we respect where powers and influence and sovereignty lies. Cooperation, we will work together on numerous things, e.g. Apollo-Soyuz high handshake, and then on human rights as well. And this feeds into the late 70s, where SALT II, a second strategic arms limitation agreement, is put in place, ready to go. But hold that thought, because we don't quite get there with that. We're working together, we're limiting arms, and we have far closer links than we've really ever had before. Things are getting better. Or are they? If you dig down to any kind of depth beyond just surface depths, it doesn't quite look as good as it might initially appear. All of the agreements in the 70s are arms limitation treaties. Limitation. So just don't build more than we already have. We're limiting this amount of intermediate, for example, weapons that we can have. So all the ones I've already got, I can keep, I just can't build more of them. Is the world really getting safer? Am I feeling less threatened by the Soviet Union? They've still got this amount of missiles. Am I feeling less threatened by the USA? They've still got this amount of missiles. They can wipe me out 6, 7, 8 times over if they need to. So think about that in terms of its importance. As well as this is going on, there are limitations, not reductions. We also have the development of new weapons as well. Technology is, of course, always advancing, and military technology is advancing at pace as well. So we're seeing something called an MIRV developed, multiple independent re-entry vehicles. And what this is essentially 10 missiles for the price of one. Instead of sending one missile up into the atmosphere and to come down on Moscow, for example, what this does, sends one missile up into space and multiple warheads split off from it, so you can get 10 or 12 warheads in there, nuclear warheads in there, and they can rain down on Moscow, Leningrad, Kyiv, Minsk, all Warsaw, Prague, all the Eastern European cities or sites that you want to rain it down on. So we're limiting less dangerous weapons, but we're not limiting the new, more dangerous weapons. And finally, these agreements, brilliant. We're sitting down, we're agreeing loads of things that we've come to an understanding on, but they are being counterproductive at times as well. When we get to Helsinki, we have 3 agreements. They're known as baskets of agreements: security, cooperation, and a third one, human rights. And after that, almost immediately after that, the Americans go, you're not sticking to the human rights agreements, the human rights basket. And the Soviets tell them to sod off, essentially. Those human rights are about speech, expression, religion, freedom of the press, all these kind of things, which obviously the Soviets have a different interpretation of to the Americans. And therefore, what we actually get in the wake of Helsinki is not a harmonious environment. It's quite a antagonistic environment. You said you'd do this, you keep your nose out of our business. And in the second half of the 70s, this agreement, this warmth starts to break down and become increasingly frosty, up to the point of 1979, when détente falls apart and a period known as the Second Cold War begins. The single event, if you have to boil it down to a single event, which is causing the end of détente, is our Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. This is important to both powers and means both powers want to, but feel it a necessity to start being hostile to each other again. It's because of their interest or perceived interest in the region of Afghanistan. The Soviets invade Afghanistan in Christmas Day 1979. They do this for a number of reasons. Afghanistan is on the southern border of the Soviet Union. And therefore, they want a friendly power in that region. What we've got in Afghanistan is a small communist government has taken power the previous year, and so they are doing it to support a friendly power, a fellow communist power on their border. Their fortune telling, their prediction of the future says if this communist government in Afghanistan falls, a hostile power will come in, probably backed by the USA in Cold War dynamics, and therefore we can't allow that to happen. So they're invading Afghanistan for that reason. Support fellow communist power and stop anyone hostile coming in Afghanistan. What we also have in Soviet calculations as well is that the communist power in Afghanistan is being challenged by, and will be overthrown if the Soviets don't step in, by a religiously motivated movement. The fighters are the Mujahideen. They are organized by kind of the religious establishment in Afghanistan. So what they're worried about is if a Muslim-driven uprising in Afghanistan overthrows a communist power there, what does that mean for the Muslims in the Soviet Union? There are 30 million Muslims in the Soviet Union, generally in those kind of Central Asian republics, your modern-day Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, places like that. So they're worried that if a revolution in Afghanistan sees a religious-motivated rebellion overthrow a communist government, will that set a precedent? Will that give an inspiration to Muslims inside the Soviet Union? So we have Soviet Union moving into Afghanistan for that reason. The Americans see this as a huge threat, and the Second Cold War comes about because of this, because they see it, yes, as Soviet expansionism. They're heading into Afghanistan, which means they're a lot closer to Pakistan and the Indian Ocean. Could they attack India from there? So they're worried about that. But more importantly, here, the oil fields of the Middle East, where America has a huge economic interest. And by the Soviets moving here 1,000 miles closer to this US economic interest, they see that as a huge, huge threat. Their industry, their navy, their automobiles are all driven by that oil, and therefore they can't afford to lose access to that oil. Adding into US worries and fears is that they lost a big ally in that region already in the form of Iran. Iran was their friend. Iran was guaranteeing them access to those oil fields. The year before the Afghani invasion, there was also a revolution in Iran, and the new power in Iran was hostile to the United States. So they have to act really assertively and aggressively in their minds to secure access to that oil field, because the Soviets are now a lot closer. Their friend Iran is now their enemy Iran, and therefore we have to be aggressive and assertive. What this looks like is the Carter Doctrine, where it's America stating, if our economic interests in the Persian Gulf are threatened, we will use force. It is within our right to use force, nuclear force if necessary. They're drawing a line. Don't come any closer to that. And we see that Second Cold War beginning there. The Americans are then funding the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, providing support, arms, money, training, etc., which is going to get the Soviet army bogged down in a really, really, really unpleasant 10-year conflict in Afghanistan. So we head then into the Second Cold War with that being kind of our spark point. Really, if we're thinking about this in a time period, we're thinking 79 or 80 through to 85, kind of when Gorbachev comes into his premiership. And for me, it's a really significant moment in the Cold War tilting very clearly towards the United States. The United States driving off into the distance in terms of its economy, military, all those kind of things, meaning the final 5 years of the Cold War ends the way it does. The US are very kind of robust in this time period. We've got Reagan replacing Carter, a clear and open anti-communist. He talks in terms of, we will win the Cold War, they will lose the Cold War, and he terms the Soviet Union an evil empire, making it very, very clear. And he backs this up with money and military. They invest trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars into developing new arms, new military, neutron bombs, stealth fighters. He invests in the Star Wars program, so a shield over the United States essentially. And what this is doing, it's tipping that balance in the arms race very much in the Americans' favour. If a war comes, there's likely one team who'll win this and one who won't. If you contrast what's going on in the United States with what's going on in the Soviet Union, economically, instead of all that investment going into arms and technological and computer development, it's going into Afghanistan and it's going into supporting a really stagnant economy. So they just don't have the money to keep pace with US military development. So that balance is really going one way. What we've also got is instability in the leadership in the Soviet Union. Why? Because everybody is very, 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 very old and everybody is dying. So Brezhnev goes, I think, 82. He's replaced by Andropov, another very, very, very old guy who goes in 84. So he only lasts just under 2 years. And then he's replaced by a guy called Chernenko, who lasts 10 months. They're all the same generation. They're all really old. Therefore, they're all dying at the same time. So we don't have a strong leadership in the Soviet Union, dynamic leadership. They literally are coming in with failing kidneys and livers and all these kind of things. They just don't have the physical ability to keep up to the task of being a Cold War competitor. And that's got that balance shift coming through, which heads us into our final 5 years with the most important person probably in this time period being the new Soviet leader in Mikhail Gorbachev. He is younger, mainly because no one of that generation, previous generation, is alive anymore. They're all dying. So he's younger, he's more realistic, and he is tasked with a very big to-do list. He's got a stagnating economy to revive in the Soviet Union. He's got to deal with the Afghanistan war. He's got to keep pace with the arms race, win the Cold War as well. So he's got a very, very difficult job on his hands. And how he sets about doing this is his policy, his umbrella policy of new thinking. This broadly breaks down into 3 strands as we study it. And all of them contribute to the end of the Cold War. First of all, if we're looking at new thinking in the USSR, so about this stagnating economy and increasing kind of resentment to Soviet control in the USSR, he's trying to improve that. He's a communist and he wants communism to succeed, but he sees that it needs updating if people want communism in their life. So this follows 2 major policies, perestroika, which is restructuring the economy, and glasnost, which is allowing openness or more openness in society. The success is varied, but what it does in terms of our Cold War, by restructuring the economy, it's bringing some slightly capitalistic elements into it. So I can keep some of my profit, for example, is trying to incentivize people. And then we're looking at glasnost, openness in society, more freedoms of speech, more freedoms of expression, etc., etc. If you're thinking the Cold War is about 2 very diametrically opposed ideologies, by him restructuring his economy, he's bringing it slightly closer to this economic ideology of capitalism. It's not capitalist, but it's bringing it closer. And similarly with glasnost, this one-party state and liberal democracies, it's bringing it again a little bit closer to the Western liberal democracies. So if we were there and his changes have brought them here, we don't have as much to fight about. We're not as different as we used to be. Therefore, we can find ways to work together and not see each other as big a threat as we used to. So that's playing a role. Other strand is new thinking in Eastern Europe. This is Czechoslovakia, Hungary, East Germany, Bulgaria, etc., etc. The powers of the Warsaw Pact. And what he does, again, we can't really afford to maintain armies. We can't really afford to invade Poland if it decides to break away. So we're going to give them more rights and freedoms and hope they choose to stay with us. So he replaces the Brezhnev doctrine with something which becomes known as the Sinatra doctrine. Why the Sinatra doctrine? Frank Sinatra, the singer, had a very famous song called My Way, and essentially it's saying these countries can choose to go their own way. We hope they will go the way of us and follow us and stay with us as part of an Eastern Bloc, a Communist bloc, a Warsaw Pact bloc, but we're not going to force them to if they don't want to. And what that means is over the period of 88, 89 and into 90, all these Eastern European countries, which were the satellite states, which were the Warsaw Pact powers, transitioned to democracies and away from Soviet-style communism. What that means is that alliance breaks up. It takes a year or two, but the Warsaw Pact, the counterweight to NATO, the threat to NATO, the force which would go to war with NATO if NATO was embroiled in conflict, ceases to exist. We've got the Soviet Union and a series of other powers, or a series of other states in Eastern Europe who are independent and not being controlled by the Soviet Union. So that threat is starting to disappear. Those changes in Eastern Europe as well, they are contributing to the fall of the Berlin Wall. By Hungary going its own way, by Hungary opening up its borders with Austria, what it means is, as an East German, I can get to West Germany. It might take me a bit longer. I might have to go take a big round trip through Hungary to then go through Austria and into Germany. But all those people who previously would have gone to West Berlin to fly out before 1961, the wall has stopped them. They now can get around it. It takes a bit longer, it takes a few more days, but you can do it. So what essentially it does, it makes the Berlin Wall redundant. People can get around it. So why does it need to exist anymore? And that's when the wall comes down, November 1989. Remember, everything in German history occurs on the 9th of November of whatever year. So 9th of November 1989. And then we've got the arms race element, a third kind of strand of the new thinking. We need to end the arms race. Why? Because the 80s, the Second Cold War has seen the balance really tip towards the Americans. The spending that we're trying to do to keep up with the Americans is stagnating our economy, it's bleeding our economy. Plus, it's not working, they've still got better stuff than us. So if a war does come, we're going to lose. So we have to diffuse this and prevent that from happening. And that's where and this is essentially, if the Cold War is a conflict between USA and United States, a conflict of threat, this is where it's ending. A series of arms talks, arms race talks, Geneva and Reykjavik. Progress is made, but nothing is agreed until we get to Washington in 1987, something called the Intermediate Nuclear Forces Treaty, where weapons for the first time, overseen by the other side, so the other side can come in and watch you do it, are destroyed. We are destroying nuclear weapons. The amount of threat that the other side has, the amount of destructive capability that the other side has is being reduced. And they're allowing me in to see this happening. So really, for all those reasons, all those ways, it's bringing the Cold War to a close. There's one final kind of addendum to this, which is our dissolution of the Soviet Union. Essentially, what all these things have led to is putting the Soviet Union on the path to dissolution. Particularly these two elements of new thinking. Glasnost has allowed people inside the Soviet Union to be more critical of the Soviet Union and Soviet leadership, so more people are spreading more messages about, we want to get rid of this form of government, we don't like the Communist Party, it's not working, we want change. And by setting the example in Eastern Europe of countries going their own way, what you see happening in the Soviet Union is those Soviet Socialist republics that make up the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, so the Soviet Union. So your countries, particularly the Baltics of Estonia, Lithuania, Latvia, they are saying, we want new thinking. We want to move away. We want to go our own way and not be part of the Soviet Union anymore. So you've got a series of kind of demands for change, demands for increased liberties, and Gorbachev really has a choice. He can say, nope, I'm not going to give any of these demands that you're giving. He offers a new constitution, which is rejected, and then essentially they declare Lithuania, Latvia, etc., we're going to go independent. He can either roll the tanks in and keep the Soviet Union together, or he can go, okay, it can cease to exist. And that's what he chooses to do. So on Christmas Day of 1991, the Soviet Union ceases to exist. Gorbachev exists as a leader of a country which disappears underneath him, or an entity which disappears underneath him, into 15 independent republics. Russia being the biggest, but Russia, Ukraine, Belarus, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Kazakhstan, Georgia, Armenia, all those ones go off into independent states. No Soviet Union, no Cold War. Okay, brilliant. Thank you for listening. I hope that was helpful. I hope that was clear. Good luck. Bye-bye.